which is I'm going to talk. Okay, thank you. Um, I'm going to be doing a mix of things. So I'm going to be doing a bit of talking, and then I'm going to be demoing some software that I use to help me with this. Why you never need to ask your teams about estimates again. I'm really happy if I won't be monitoring the chat channel, Red, but if anything comes up, can you let me know? And if you want to interrupt me and ask a question as we're going, I'd rather we did it there and then than trying to like backtrack and forwards later. Okay, so before we start, I want to really talk about what this conversation is and what it isn't, right? It's not a talk about the no estimates debate. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there are flame wars that rage continuously about no estimates. And I'm not really talking about not estimating. What I'm talking about is good forecasting. And it's different, right? It's a different perspective on the world. And it's also about a talk about using data to do all of the hard work, rather than kind of wishes and fairy dust and the highest paid person's opinion and anything else like that. As product owners, we get a lot of pressure about when will it be done and all of this kind of thing. So tonight, it's not about not estimating, it's about doing great forecasts. So I think this is probably one of my favorite quotes in life. Without data, you're just another person with an opinion. And I think as product owners, this is something that we take to heart from the product perspective. Did the thing we just build work? Did anybody actually use it? Was my bet a good bet, right? But how often do we do that with the other data we need to help do our jobs well? And that's what I really want to focus on tonight is planning data. What data do we get for that? What data are we collecting? So the problem as I kind of see it is that for data, we need data needs, there's clarity. We're going to finish this. I want to do this feature, maybe I want to do this feature. Which one should I do? Do I want to do a lot of work distracting the team about finding out how big this thing is, or how do I model it, right? There's a piece in my backlog. Somebody's asking me how long it is before I'm going to get to it. I probably should tell them, and how am I going to do that, right? And do I live in a culture of absolute honesty, and that's what you need from data, right? You need to be absolutely honest about something. But I think data collection isn't like that. Like we ask people to make an informed guess, right? But we also hope that the people who are guessing are actually informed, right? And I think the next one, rely on experts, right? When we're not doing, who are not doing the work. I think my biggest criticism I've ever seen, like in life in general, in software development, is, people go to experts and ask experts for an estimate, and then the expert never does the work, right? Or rarely does the work. And so, if I was the best hair cutter in the world, which clearly I wouldn't get a lot of practice on myself, right? But if I was the best hair cutter in the world, and somebody asks me how to do it, and Red's never held a pair of scissors in his life, but he's got to do the work, the moment he picks those scissors up, we're running late, because the work's the same. It's somebody's hair. We're going to trim Pete's beard, right? Heaven forbid, but we're going to trim Pete's beard. Like, the work hasn't changed. The size of the work hasn't changed. Right? It could be a 3-point beard, right? But my ability to get that done is way faster than Red's. So we rely on experts a lot, but they don't really do the work. We might use averages from the previous guesses to make a prediction in the future, and there's risks in that. And I'm going to talk a lot about that later. But also, like, how safe is it as an environment? I used to be an Agile coach before I was a product owner, and I worked with one team, and we were doing just a standard thing about estimating. And I asked the team to estimate this story, just whatever, this fake story in the training, and nobody gave me an answer. And I talked a bit more about it. Just I'm thinking, maybe they don't understand. It still didn't get an answer. And I'm like, it's a story about putting some Lego on a board, right? And they're like, I said, we can estimate this. Like, no, we don't give estimates here. Right, what do you mean? I'm like, anything we say gets held against us in a court of law, sort of thing. And so they wouldn't even give an estimate for a training course. They were so kind of burnt by this that they were just like, you'll just tell us what the number is and we'll do that anyway. right? That's how they felt. So that's why I see data collection is really foggy. There's not a lot of clarity in data collection, right? And the techniques we use, but we need a lot of clarity to make great decisions.
And are you going to go into that further? Because it's like the only reason why we ask for this is because we need to make certain decisions, and it's a cost benefit.
Yeah, whether it's a cost benefit or whether I can do that feature before that feature, or maybe this feature would be better than that, or what's the timings of my queues if you're doing some other techniques. It's all of those kind of things that you need that data for, but the data you get is really unreliable. Right, and I am gonna go into that in a lot more detail. And any questions so far about this? Does this kind of make sense? Are people seeing these problems? Yeah.
Nothing in the chat.
Yeah, I saw Steve stick his thumb up. Thanks for the feedback there, Stephen, sorry. So my first Agile experience was in 2005. And I did my Scrum Master training with good old Ken Schwaber in 2006. I have exactly the same toolkit now, well, I don't now, but I did, than I did in 2006. I've got, some story points, some sort of velocity chart, and, the tools might make it look, really nice and flashy, but it's the same chart that I used to do in Excel. And we have a method of sizing where we look at risk and effort and complexity, and all of this stuff. But it's not different. Nothing's different. So, agility is not the agility I started with in 2005. It's very different. Some places it's better. Some places I think it's significantly worse. But it has evolved in those, whatever that is, 17 odd years. But I've not really seen much of a change in this. You go to lots of training courses, if they still do story points. I know like Scrum and things have dropped them, but lots of companies and training courses and organizations still use some sort of Fibonacci sizing sequence, right? And so maybe if you're using it on a Kanban team, you drop all of this and you use things like cycle time and throughput and lead time and all that kind of stuff. But in general, this is your toolkit. So I'm like, it's not great, and it hasn't really changed. So the other conundrum I'm facing is there's a problem with sizing. And I felt like this for a long time. So this is a chart from a team that I worked with. And this team had been together for 5 years. They weren't stupid people. They were really smart. They hadn't changed domains a lot. They knew their domain really well. They were articulate. They talked to each other. But sprint after sprint after sprint, it's like we didn't get things finished, or we ran out of work. And it just didn't make sense. The velocity chart, going back to that, it's like this was going up and down and up and down, and I'm trying to level it, and I'm trying to how much could we put in? Just didn't make sense. And I talked to other people on other teams. They're like, yeah, we're seeing the same problems. And so what I did here was I calculated the cycle time for each story based on this is in hours, and based on its sizing. So can anybody want to chirp in here and see what I see? Any patterns?
Yeah, the larger the size, the longer. Well, actually, no. I'm a little bit more confused now.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
cycle time didn't really match.
Essentially, most things were an 8, but it took the 8s as long as the 3s and the 2s, and there wasn't any 1s. The 13s were pretty much as long as the 8s, apart from a couple. And so I'm like, this is a mess. No wonder we can't size, because say we did 20 points, right? Well, if I took in 2 of these whopping great 8s, I'm like, we're dead. Because but if I took in a couple of these 2s, that they might take as long as some of these other 8s. So you're like, what's going on? And I checked other teams, and I saw similar patterns where you got this kind of like this. It does kind of go up, but only kind of, right? And so a fix I did, and I don't have a chart for it, but I'm going to talk about it, was instead of looking at this kind of thing and points and stuff, I started just counting the number of stories. And when I started counting the number of stories, it was a lot, the kind of line was flatter. We did pretty much the same number of stories every sprint. I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe sizing just doesn't work. Right, this is all building up to kind of where I'm going with the estimation, but that was the background for me. It's like sizing's a load of crap. I don't want to do it. It doesn't make any sense. We dropped sizing, just counted stories. Everything was fine, right? But I couldn't really do much of an estimation apart from just some counting, right? But then I read this blog post. I like to say that I may have invented story points, and if I did, I'm sorry now. This is Ron Jeffries writing about story points saying, I wish I hadn't done it. So, yeah, I saw that, Sharon, wow, right? And it was like, and it's the article about how they're misused and how they don't work, and and I'm like, okay, so I've got this, I've got the problem with sizing, I can't read this, and I read this and I'm like, oh, well, even he doesn't think it's a good idea, and pretty much everything out of Ron's mouth is gold. So I'm like, all right, well, what am I going to do now? And then this hit me. So I haven't got I've got a book, which I didn't put the picture up, but I'm just going to get it, right, called The Floor of Averages. Right, it's a fantastic book. It's quite thick, so it's good to beat people with, right, if you need to get this point through. But remember, we going back to the good old velocity chart, and I'm like, well, what's my average story points over the last, Mike Cohn used to use like the last 8 sprints. You look at the average, and we can calculate that, and that'll be the team's velocity. Well, so Elon Musk, he's got a net worth of something like 265 billion. So when this is a rugby stadium, if you're wondering why the posts look a bit odd, right? So when Elon Musk sits in that stadium, on average, everybody has $3 million, right? Which they don't. They really do not have $3 million at all, right? And when he sits in this bar and has a drink, everybody's a multi-billionaire, right? And so averages lie. They are a shortcut in maths that lies to us. And so it's getting worse in my head, and we don't live in a perfect world. So I used to do a lot of production support as well. And people, they're like, well, we're hitting our targets, our KPIs, the average fixed time is, whatever it might be. And I'm like, but there's a lot of unhappy people. Our ratings are through the roof, but our stats are right. And so I'm looking at it and I'm like, yeah, well, maybe it's because there's this massive tail of people who are really unhappy, even though we have a lot of stuff here that gets done. 50% of our people are not happy with our data, you get the idea. It's skewed either way. It's rare in our life that we get a symmetrical distribution of work. So to kind of repeat this again, I've got, well, this doesn't work. Oh no, he said this, and averages are lying to me again, and all my toolbox suddenly falls apart. It's rusted. I've left it outside, next to the sea, and all my tools have rusted, right? So I kind of get hit with a perfect storm. My sizing doesn't work. No matter what I try, it doesn't work. The guy who creates story points doesn't work, and averages are a world of lies, all right? And so that's the start of me looking for something else, right? A different thing. Any questions? Just before I move on to the next section, anything people want to talk about, bring up? Has that triggered anything that you might want to speak about? Anything in the comments?
There was a little bit of discussion about using the different modalities. And if you go back to your diagram, discusses, I don't think the average person truly understands the difference between mode, median, and mean.
Yep.
But to have the distribution like that and say, skews one way or the other makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And I think that's I think learning about averages and how averages don't help you really if the data is not perfectly symmetrical. The that's another reason why my toolkit around this velocity chart, I was like, well, it's no good. You know, I've got a stone chisel and I'm trying to, you know, build a microcomputer. This tool isn't going to help me anymore.
So there is a closely related concept. Often the word normal is used to mean average, particularly in by weather forecasters on television. And of course, that doesn't mean you should expect the weather to be normal.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I get you. I get you. So any other questions? Are we all good to move on? I'll take that as a good to move on.
Good to move on.
So I'm going to start to head into calmer waters now. We've had the perfect storm. I came across this presentation. Your project behaves like a hurricane, forecast it like one, by a guy called Dan Vacanti. And I was looking for something else. You know, when you're looking on YouTube and you're searching for something and the bar on the side comes up and there's other things that appear. Well, this appeared. I'm like, oh, I'll have a look at that. And he's done like this presentation maybe 3 or 4 times, maybe more, similar content. And I'm like, I've found the answer. Right, this is the calm in my storm. And I hardly recommend people to find a version of this from Dan and read it or watch it. It's amazing. So what he talks about is that we want to move away from deterministic kind of forecasting. It'll be done on the 28th of July to more of this, which funny enough, you talked about hurricanes and weather forecasting, probabilistic forecasting. Right, and that's the key element in this presentation, and it's the key element of his talk, which is the further away things are in your work, your product backlog, your product roadmap, your journey, the less likely you are to be able to predict them, because there's so many things before it that affects what's coming in the future, right? And so if you think about a weather forecast, at the bottom here, they're saying for this hurricane, they're like, yeah, it's here. We know it's here because we can see it. Right. And then a little bit further out, you know, well, yeah, you know, it's going to hit the coast. So the coast might slow it down. There's a tropical front coming in from the other side as well. So it's going to be in that kind of zone, so that they have data for each of those steps. Right. But the other part to this, which is super important, is they don't just forecast it once and go, okay, have at it, it'll be all right. Right. They are continually reforecasting and reforecasting and reforecasting this journey every time they get more data. And that's one thing, you know, I didn't really do a lot of. I did my velocity chart and, you know, hope my averages were right and did that a few times and then, you know, did a bit more prediction. But I kind of did that only really to help me in the sprint. I didn't do an awful lot of having to recalculate my product backlog journey, my depth, when that feature block might be finished. So one of the things this taught me was to think about, like, as a product owner, forecasting is something I should do a lot of, right? But I shouldn't do it manually because then that's slow and inefficient. So I have to think about doing forecasting a lot of with a tool to help me. Does that kind of make sense? So that's where it started. I watched the video, I saw this, and I thought, oh, there's something in this. And then, well, I love reading. I don't know if you can see behind me, you probably can. I've got books everywhere, right? And I've got books that side of me, and I've got books that side of me, and I've got books in front of me. And I think, like, the quote from Fran Lebowitz kind of sums it up for me. Think before you speak and read before you think, right? And I think that's very important. And so Dan wrote those 2 books. When will it be done? And Actionable Agile, Metrics for Predictability. This one we're going to talk about more because it's relative to the tool we're going to have a look at. This is all about why we forecast and what we forecast and, you know, that kind of stuff. And I read those books twice, once to kind of read it and twice to kind of get it, because the one on the right's a little bit more maths heavy. And it's a bit like, oh, what's he saying again? All right, you know, I've woken up again, I'll try it again. But they're both great books. And they taught me a lot about how to forecast, what I'm looking for, why I should pick certain numbers, you know, why I should model bits, you know, and we don't have time to go into that tonight. We've only got like half an hour, so I want to go into more detail. But those books, awesome. It's worth reading, right? But this is part of my journey to get to why I never do estimates anymore. The next part is you have to kind of understand something. So I don't expect you to read this. I don't need you to read it, but this is a list of all of the cognitive biases that affect us when we think, right? And one of the cognitive biases that's pertinent to the conversation we're having is something called, when we notice something has changed, and there's a cognitive bias called anchoring bias. All right, is anybody familiar with anchoring bias? Stephen is. Anybody else?
Yes, right.
Perfect.
Salespeople use it all the time.
Yeah, and actually that's where we're going to talk. The anchoring effect. Yeah. So when we give a date or an amount of time to deliver something, we give an initial estimate of 10 weeks and we give a new estimate of 8 weeks. We're the heroes, right? You give an initial estimate of 10 weeks and then you give a new estimate of 12 weeks, you're a 0, right? But why is the first number right? If I've used exactly the same estimation method between both of those, why is the first data right and the second data wrong, right? Where's the validity in that? So there's a flaw when people ask for something and then you give them another number. Anchoring bias kills you every time, right? And this thing here, which is it Eric, or how do I pronounce your name properly?
It's Eric.
Eric, cool.
Yes.
So Eric, he said that it's like, yeah, we'll put $1,000 on the mug, but then we'll tell you it's 300. I'm sure Amazon never does that, right? And you're like, wow, that's a bargain, but actually it's a $300 mug anyway, right? And that's the same with estimates. Every time we give people some data, they assume that the validity of that was right first time because of anchoring bias. It's the first number you get.
And you should go back and get that clip from Star Trek. I can't remember if it's Star Trek 4, the movie, where Scotty admits to always inflating his estimates. That way he can always look like a miracle worker.
Yep.
Yeah. Clearly the first guy sandbagged his properly.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's what I said it right at the start about that problem with data is that people, if they don't feel safe, they will use whatever appropriate technique they want, the Scotty effect, the sandbagging, whatever it might be, to make sure that they're safe and safe from punishment, right? But because they've inflated that data, it's like, oh, well, we shouldn't build that because it's going to be too costly. But it's not really costly. It's just full of lies. Right, so you have no idea. So as a product owner, you start to make bad choices because you can't afford something, right? And so we want that data to not be human driven in a sense. So I've got a question for people. Riddle me this: what does every estimate have that you never see? Anyone? I can see, Stephen, you're my glamorous assistant this evening. I see your hand raised.
I'll say risk or error.
Oh, look at that. Certainty. Woohoo! Stephen, if I could send you a book, I would. Right? I haven't written a book, but when I've written a book, I'll send you one.
Perfect.
So it's certainly, when we say it'll be finished on the 25th of June, what they hear is it'll be finished on the 25th of June with 100% certainty. And that's a key element of forecasting. So if we go back here, nobody says that, I don't even know where that is in this. If you can win another book if you can tell me where that dot is. Nobody, when the hurricane is here, nobody will ever say to you, there's 100% likelihood that that's where the hurricane's going to be in 5 days' time. Nobody on earth will tell you that because they're like, it's not going to be there. We've got all this, or it might be, there's a chance, but it's inside that zone now, right? But we don't do that. We're going to hit wherever that is, Kansas City or wherever it was. We're going to hit it on the 23rd of June. And that's a real problem, right? And I think that's what we get this nervousness about estimates. We get this kind of like padding and everything else because of that lies. You know, if you said to your, you know, your boss, yeah, we'll be finished on the 25th of June with a 25% chance of that happening. Do you not think that might trigger a conversation? Right? Does anybody think it would? Or do you think people would still just ignore you? I'd like to hear some thoughts from the floor.
They ignore in some people's ears, for sure.
Yeah. They'll only hear part of that sentence.
Yeah, Rylan, I think you were going to say something.
Go ahead. I think I was talking over you. Go ahead.
No, I'm just in a loud place. So I was just saying, nope, they'll ignore you. I totally agree.
Yeah.
They're only going to hear the thing they want to hear.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things I've learned from this approach is that I'm very clear about the level of certainty I'm giving them, right? And because I don't just give them one certainty, I give them different certainties, and then you can make a choice. So if I said, you know, it's the 25th of June with a 25% chance, and it's the 13th of July with an 85% chance, and it's the 14th of September with a 99% chance, which one do you want to pick now? We can have a conversation about, you know, is it literally just the CEO's dog's birthday that we've decided to launch this on, or is there any meaningful date behind it? You know, and we can use the certainties to help us. Right. And if we want to be more certain by that date, maybe we'll have to reduce some of the work we're going to do, right? Whether by scope or by feature complexity to hit that date, right? But we can increase the certainty. I've covered a lot of ground in a kind of short time here. Anything that people want to talk about, questions, thoughts?
So if I were your boss and you came to me with that, you know, this date with this much certainty, I would probably go back with, well, how do you know? How do you know it's 25%? How do you know it's 85%? How do I know you're just not pulling these out of your, you know what?
Proverbial. Yeah, I'm with you. And good. That's a good question. And we're
going to really, if I was your boss, I clearly want the July 25th or the June 25th because that's earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally. But like, you know, I think that caveat has to be there. That's 25% chance of getting there. So, you know, if you're putting marketing material out, if you're teeing up a big presentation, you're at risk, right? You're going to look stupid, right? Do you want to look stupid, right? You know, what do we do about that?
Yeah, there's a great deal of shifting accountability to the people making the estimates or the people, the development team, because they can go, oh, our team, they don't know how to estimate. Look at them. They told me the June 25th. And look, they didn't do it at all. It's, you know, not my fault. I still want my raise.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And that's where you get that single loop learning, where it's like, if only we tried harder to estimate harder, by trying harder, we'll get better at it. Yeah. As opposed to double loop learning, is our approach to estimating actually the right approach to give us the result?
Yeah.
You know, any other thoughts from people? Cool. Red, can I just have a quick time check? How much do I have left?
Oh, you got about 40 minutes.
Perfect. And we're good. We're on time. So this is the tool of the book. Sadly, there's no film of the book. Well, probably not, sadly. But we're gonna do some demo stuff on this tonight because I want to show you, to Red's point, how did you work this out? Well, here's the calculations. Here's the tool that does it for me. You can do this all in a spreadsheet too, but you know, let's not. You know, this takes seconds. Spreadsheets take a long time. So what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to switch screens in a minute, is I'm going to demo into this is we're going to look at how we might plan a sprint using this tool. How big's this feature? When might we finish this kind of work? You know, other things we can do to model the data, and, you know, how can I target my help? A different way to run a stand-up where you don't care about people's updates, but you care about things that are stuck, right? And the tools can all help with this. Now, let's see if this switches over properly. It does. Perfect. Look at that. All right. So there's a product called Actionable Agile. I'm not here to sell the product in any shape or form. It's the tool I use, but you do get a free demo with it. And that's what I want to use and talk about. So what this tool does is it takes, if you're using, you can import a spreadsheet with just some data in it. If you've got Azure DevOps, if you've got Jira or whatever, it can be plugged into that and it can read it. And what it does is it takes every single thing that you do in your team and close it and work on it and calculates data from that, captures some metadata as well. Right. And so this is some sample data, but it's kind of, so like this story here, I can click on it and go, it's sat in dev done for 30 days. It's just made up data, but you get the idea. You can see it moving through the states. I don't care about that as a product owner. When I was an Agile coach and a Scrum Master, I 100% cared about this because I was looking for outliers, trends, as our cycle time decreasing, is it going up, that kind of stuff. But as a product owner, not so much. So what I do care about is this modeling, Monte Carlo modeling, right? And so Red, when you said, what are we using? I said, I'm using a statistical forecasting technique called Monte Carlo modeling to tell me when things might be finished. And so what the tool does is up here, it's plotting how many things the team, or in this case, right, there's lots of teams together in the data, right? So I'm going to switch it out just to one team. You don't have to worry about how the tool works. And it says, this is how many stories this team closes off every day over the past X months that you have data, right? And so I'm not asking for an estimate. I'm like, just get on and work and like, do your jobs, all of the stuff that affects the team will affect the team, and we'll close some of the stories will be bigger, some of the stories will be smaller, it's all kind of good. And so what I can do with this is go, all right, so I'm going to say my sprint is the 1st of June to the, where are we? Let's say the 14th. So 13 days, I'm going to make it, it doesn't matter, it's 13 days long, right? How many stories can I finish? And what it's just done when I click that button, right? When I click that more button, is it's simulated this behavior, right, 1 million times. So what it said is that some days we get lots of this, some days we get lots of that. So it's imagine this team has been running for essentially 6 months, whatever it is, 4 months, 1 million times. That's a lot of data. And so what it's telling me is that for that time period, right, I don't really need that thing at the bottom, that's just confusing the date, is I have a 50% chance, remember my old velocity from my old chart? I've got a 50% chance of getting 9 stories done. I've got an 85% chance of getting 5 done, and I've got a 95% chance of getting 3. Dan in the book, it kind of recommends you use that 85 because that covers most of the work. Like 85% is most of the work that your team would ever do, right? So I'm like, great, my sprint velocity, the number of stories I'm going to take into the next sprint is going to be 5. Now you're thinking, great, well, so how does this work? Well, I want you to think about this. It models team behavior, right? So I've picked this whole time period, but let's say actually a couple of people were here and then they left, and sizing can be really impacted by somebody. So I've got my glamorous assistant Stephen here, and he's very he's very positive. So when we talk about stories, he tries to make them smaller because they're only small, they're little, and so my story points go from like 5 to 3. And then you've got Red here, who's very pessimistic, right? And suddenly my story points go from the 5 to a 9, but the work hasn't changed size. It's just our opinions have changed, right? Another flaw in story sizing. But here, it's like the team is doing their job. So let's say, Red and Stephen join the team over here, right? Well, I'm going to select just this time period. So now I'm going to model that behavior of my team members. Let's have a look at this. Oh yeah, we can get 5 done again, right? Just happens to be similar. But let's say Red and Stephen left the team and actually the team started to behave like this. I'm like, oh, now we're only going to get like maybe 1 story finished in that time period. So you can model the data on the team's behaviors, things that have happened, and you get some stats. So for sprint planning, I use this every time. Set my limit. At the end of last sprint, I go back a little bit and I've got some more data now, which is like last sprint's data. When the next sprint happens, I go back a bit further. I've got some more data. So I start to build up that pattern. And the more data you have, the kind of more reliable this is, except that if you're statistically minded, it's like maybe 11 or 12 data points before it becomes something like 97% accurate. So you don't need much more than that.
So how do you get started? Is it simply just looking at the cycle time of your stories?
Or how does this work?
Yes.
Yeah, it's looking, this is looking at throughput. How many things do we finish each day? And it's modeling to go, what's the likelihood of us finishing how many per day, right? So if you look over here, like there's less than 1% chance of them finishing 20 stories inside 13 days. There is no data to support that, right? That they'll ever go, if you counted all of these things up, you know, it's like, it's only 1 and 2 and 3 here. If you counted all that up and then looked at all those gaps, it's like, it's really unlikely that's going to happen. So, you know, the bell curve's kind of skewed over a little bit, right? And so that's step one. If I want to look at a sprint, I use this. I don't ask people for story sizing. I don't care about that. I just ask them to work on the work. Now, the other advantage of this is let's say they were building software for a hospital, and then suddenly they're having to build, I don't know, a computer game for Lego, right? It's an entirely different domain. Right, my estimation techniques previously be like, well, we have to drop all our story points and start again. And this is like, that's exactly the same. But what all that happens is we let 11 stories go past, and we can model out those, you know, those last dates on the board, and we're like, okay, that's likely a forecast. So it's very quick. We don't have to go through lots of laborious story sizing exercises when people are trying to work out the difference in sizing because the domain's changed or the product's changed or it's an area they're unfamiliar. We just let them work. So that's sprint planning, right? So let's go the other way, right? Which is when might something be finished?
Hang on a second. We may have some questions coming
All right,
in.
cool. Let's go.
Richard, Wendy, I see y'all have unmuted.
If somebody wants to talk up, go for it.
Steve?
Yeah, I like this a lot because if you ask people to break things down, they tend to break them down into similar sized chunks with the current level of knowledge.
Yeah.
So let's say you're just starting. You're going to start an AWS project, right?
Yeah.
You know nothing about AWS, right? You're going to break them down to like, I'm going to log in.
Yep.
And I'm going to set up a VP, not a VPN, a security zone, and those are all like eight points.
Yep.
And then when you've been doing it for like a while, you say, "Oh, I'm going to do this feature," and it's 8 points.
Yep. Yep. And so one of the things I didn't talk about with this is that you can tell it, depending on the tool or the data set you've uploaded, this could be the number of stories you finish. This could be the number of epics you finish. This could be the number of features you finish. This could be the number of sausages you fry at a barbecue. You know, it doesn't matter, right? It's still volume by date, right? It doesn't matter if you're using Kanban. It doesn't matter if you're using Scrum. It doesn't matter if you're using dynamic systems development method, safe, crystal clear, you know, whatever method you want. It's the same. You do some work, it gets finished. All right. Any other questions pop up, Red?
No, you good to go.
All right. So let's talk about this one. When? So let's say I've done a good old story map, right? You know, just in case people aren't familiar with those, but I expect, you know, story map. Let's bring that up. So let's say my team got together, and I don't like that one. That one will do. Open image, new tab. All right. I've done a story map. Right, you know, this is roughly what I think we're going to build. You know, I've got some releases. I know how long is that going to take? Well, you probably need to do some more work from this product owner in detailing the stories out so we have a bit more information. You know, all right, okay, see me in a couple of weeks. I'll go and work on that. Then we'll run a story sizing session, and then we'll get a few of them done and whatever. Well, I don't need to do that now. I can kind of go, oh, okay, how many stories have I got here? I'll count them up. I'll come to this, and I'm just going to filter this again to go back to that team we were using before. So we got the same data. And I'm going to go, all right, so we're going to work on 30 stories. We think that feature's 30 stories long, right? And I kind of stuck it in the roadmap for us to start on the 20th of June. When might that be finished? Well, there's an 85% chance it's going to be finished in the 14th of August. You know, going back to that conversation with my boss, there's a 50% chance it's going to be finished, you know, on the 3rd. When should we start talking about releasing this? You know, there's a 95% that, you know, are you prepared to give it another week, but actually be really certain we're going to get it finished? That's a good conversation to have. It's quite powerful. And again, the same modeling applies. We're not doing very much. You know, it's out to October. The team's rocking it and hitting stuff every day. It's back to July, right? So, I mean, obviously you could lie and make this up now and make the results look great, but that's not going to help you at all. It's going to, you know, so, so that's the way I do it. You know, I've got a feature. How long might it be? You know, I said at the start, I want to compare 2 features. Just go away and knock up a story map of everything we can think of. Other things you can do is go, which I've done as well, is look at all the previous features and go, how much do we add to these features? And, you know, like what's the plus and minus on a feature after we've started it? So, you know, for every feature we build in the story mapping, we add 12 more stories, 50 more stories. I'm like, all right, so we, you know, I'm going to add an extra bit of padding to this because really we add some more work. So I'm going to say it's 45 stories. Right now I've got my certainties. I'm going to be able to talk about these as levels of risk with people. I haven't asked the team, not once, don't need to, don't care. All they need to do is work. I mean, obviously they're not, you know, they're not robots on a production line, right? I'm not talking about them and trying to dehumanize them, but all they need to do is their job. They don't need me to distract them with, how big's this? Right, I just calculate that data.
So you're still doing good old-fashioned backlog refinement, making sure that there are no questions, all the enabling artifacts are available to them so that when they actually begin the work, they can end the work as fast as possible.
Yeah. I'm not like I'm now suddenly in a control room with some levers I'm pulling and I never talk to them again. You know, maybe some days that would be nice, but no, I'm spending my time on the things that matter, because this doesn't take me very long to do. If you think about it, how long would it take me to work out all of this stuff, estimate it all up, write it up, and make a decision about whether to build this feature? Or literally, I can type in the word 45, I can click the more button, let this run 1,000,000 times and go, all right, I think that's looking like September. So it's also giving me some value time back. I don't have to spend hours on you know, days on features trying to work stuff out. I can model it. I can put some things in.
I like this too because, well, the cool looks good. In other words, it looks trustworthy. So now you can go to your business owner or whoever it is is giving you money and say, right here, right in front of you, there's a conversation about risk we need to have.
Yep.
Right. It's not like, oh, well, what are the risks or what is it? You know, what's the, no, just trust the tool. They've done this.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. Their livelihood is based on this information being correct.
Right.
Yep,
And you just got to know that it's statistics based on being done. And you can, if you know anything about statistics, you're like, yeah, that works.
Cool. So, like I said, you can apply this to features, you can apply it to other things. So I want to show you a slightly different approach. Oh, actually, no, I'll come back to that in a minute.
Hey, so just before you leave this.
Yep.
So what's step 1 to get started to moving towards a data-based approach? What's step 2? What's step 3? And then what does your backlog refinement session look like?
So step 1 would be either using something like this, and like you can get this SaaS version of this for like $20 a month or something like that. So if you wanted to trial it, you could do that, or you could just build a Monte Carlo model in a spreadsheet, right? You know, the zero impact, low cost MVP, right? That's step 1 for me. It's like start to gather data, right? Step 2 is run the system like you normally do, and then use this to test whether it's right. So one of my last clients I worked with, I looked at their data and said, your plans are, you know, massively over ambitious. I think you're going to finish 25 features by the end of that whatever that period was. They're like, yeah, you know, BS, Mike. It's not going to be like that. So I went back at the end and said, how many features did you finish? And they went, 24. I'm like, woohoo, right? And they're like, yeah, I know you told us so. And I'm like, you know, so I'm just going to turn my light on. Excuse me, a bit of light. Oh, it doesn't work. Oh well, never mind. So that's the thing I do next is prove your data out. You know, like, hey, look, I told you we were only going to do 7 stories this sprint. Huh, we did 7. I mean, assuming you're not rolling over partly finished stuff from the last sprint, you know, and all of that kind of mess, right? But that's the second thing I would do, right? And then the third thing I would do is, and I've kind of got that a little bit later in the other part of my presentation, so I'm going to talk about it in a minute, which is about how to keep engagement with the team and how to keep talking and how to get good data and, you know, all of that. So I'll come back to that in a second.
Very good, thanks.
All right, so the last thing I wanted to talk about, right, is how to change your stand-ups. And I found this, it's hard to read, so I'm going to talk you through it. It's a lot of color too. If you are colorblind, you can do some other things here around the different types of colors. So what this does is, this is the Kanban board in this fake system, right? But you know, whatever, it's the view of the states the work goes through. And what it's telling you is, for this team, right, for their data, right? So if I go back to my old filter and I go back to that team again, I'll just bring that up. So can you see at the side here, there's these different color bands, right? Red, orange, sort of yellow, lighter green, darker green. So if you're in dark green, what it's telling you is that this piece of work will be finished, 50% of your work gets finished in 7 days or less. 70% of your work gets finished in 10 days or less. 85% of the work gets finished in 15 days or less, and 95% of the work gets finished in 20 days or less, right? And so what it's telling you is where your dot is on the board is when it's likely to finish, based on how much time things normally spend in each of those columns to get to that result. So for stand-ups, I don't really care about talking about, you know, today I did this and tomorrow I'm going to do that, and we can fill that in, and we do that, but a couple of days a week, look at this instead and kind of go, you know, if say for example here, right, this thing's only been working, you know, it's only been going for 10 days, right? But it's spent 10 days in this column because it's just fake data, but it's like, it's already in the orange. So I know it's not going to get finished for at least another 5 days, at least, somewhere between, right, it's what is it now, like day 12. So somewhere between now and day 20 is it going to get finished. Now, if that's important to get finished because we have to get that bug out to production, we have to do something about timeline, we don't want to fail the sprint with this is already telling me that we're in trouble, right? And so I have conversations instead with, I don't really care about that. I care about these ones, and especially, well, they're a bit late, but anything in the red, I'd be going, something's wrong, we need to talk about it. The other thing you can do, which it's about help, is we can start to flag things that have been in the same column for over a certain time period. So me as a product owner, I might not care about so much here or whatever, maybe the Scrum Master does, but if there was something in dev active flashing that's been there a long time, I might be going, are we clear on what we need to do? Do we need to have a quick sit down session again to make sure we all understand it, right? Or if something's in testing for a long time, I might be going, like, are you testing what the devs were building? Did we get, like, is there an error in how we were talking? You know, did I say I'm thinking about a four-sided shape, the color of the sky, and did you assume I was talking about a blue square and not a gray diamond, right? You know, so where's the errors? But I use this to help target help. Where's the stories that are in trouble? It's a lot harder to read a board than it is, you know, like look at every story and go, well, when did they move that last? I can't really recall. So I use this to target help. Right, and so I use my time wisely. Any questions about that?
Not about this, but Monica has placed a question in the chat.
Oh,
basically, it's about story size. What
Right.
happens if you have 10 really small ones and you have 10 really big ones? Isn't a
Ah.
prerequisite that they're all about the same size?
Good question. That's a really good question. So was Monica, wasn't it?
Monica.
Monica, perfect. So Monica, what I would say to you is this, right? Is if it's normal for your team to get runs of little things and runs of big things, right? Just because that's just what normal looks like for your team, this will be modeled here. So you'll see a spike where we get bing, 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 lots of small things done, and then gaps, and then the larger thing gets kind of done. So this, by taking that larger data set out like that, I'm modeling that as going, well, that's normal for this team, right? That's absolutely normal for me. I don't, big things come in, then we get lots of little bugs. Then we do a big feature, then we get lots of little bugs, whatever. If that's normal for your team's behavior, then you just model it with the data, right? If that's not normal and it was this one-off and you're like, oh, it's thrown all my charts. What I've done before is like I've tagged, so this filtering thing, I don't really want to talk about this, but you can have metadata on it. It's just whatever metadata you choose. But so if you had like a tag cloud, you might have like some stories where you go, I put a tag called ignore on it. So any story with ignore, I will take, so it's like I've selected all, but I don't want those ones because that's my ignore stories, right? And so you can use that to get rid of anomalies from this as well, where that was just a one-off where we had a bug bash and we don't normally do it. But let's say you did a bug bash, every couple of weeks, that would be a normal behavior for your team, so you would model it. Did that answer your question, Monica?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
No problem. Any other questions from people? I'm going to go back to my presentation now. So any other questions on the tooling before I leave?
Good to go.
Perfect. All righty. So I like to, mess around with data and stuff. And so one of the things I did for another team where this is where we didn't have actionable agile, I did the Monte Carlo simulation myself. So if you see here, it says run 1, run 2, run 3. There are 1,000 columns, right? So rather than that other tool where I pressed a button and I got 1,000,000, I had to do 1,000 columns myself and recalculate it, right? But what I did was I said, because we wanted to put some features on the product backlog, and we're like, well, we know how long it takes us to do a number of stories. So what I did was I looked at each feature and I counted the number of stories inside each feature. And then I used that. So basically you just kind of go, if you roll a 1, you put 20. If you roll a 2, you get 12. And I randomized that data to do a Monte Carlo simulation. And so I got back that, oh, sorry, I need to click on it. 85% of my features have 12 or fewer stories. So what I did was I just went, oh, okay. My product backlog, here's a feature. I know that 12 stories takes us X days. So I'm going to put a block on my product backlog on my roadmap for each feature, and I'm going to give it 12 stories. Now, will the dates be right? Not really, but the sizing is about right, because some of those features might be one story features, some of those features might be 20 story features, but roughly it gives me a feeling of how much can I get done this year? Or how much can I get done in the next 3 months? Or how much can I get done in the next 6 months? So you can do it by hand too. It's just slower and clunkier, right? If you look at it on this tool, it's like I've said, how long will it take for 12 items to be complete? Right, well, there's a 50% likelihood of 19 days. There's an 85% likelihood of 26 days. So I can just add it to my feature roadmap and go, okay, each feature has a 26-day block on my roadmap. Give or take ramp up time, ramp down time, and other things. So that's using a spreadsheet to do exactly the same thing as the tool. So that's why I said, Red, you can do a spreadsheet first to kind of prove some of your data out. Okay. Any questions just about that little bit? Nope. All right. But here's the one you said, Red. The conversations and sizing are useful, but we don't want to lose that. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely don't. Right. So here's things I've done before. We've kept sizing because we want to have the conversations. How big is it? Well, oh, I think it involves all of this. You're joking. It doesn't involve any of this, right? You know, that kind of thing. I'm just going to turn my light on. It's getting a bit dark. It's getting late in Canada. You know, the polar bears are coming out. I've got to get my spear ready to fight them off, right? So keep sizing and just ignore the numbers. There's a technique I really like called the 3 amigos, right? That's a fantastic technique. Use that instead, right? The other technique I really like, I didn't write it on here because it's too hard to like put in a bullet point, but is use open-ended questions. So, you know, rather than asking people, for example, so do we all understand that when there's an error, the alert message appears on the screen? Oh, yeah, nod. You could ask an open-ended question and get people to write it down. Goes, what happens when there's an error? Right, get everybody to write an answer down, right? And especially if you're remote, they can just all type it and, you know, you can have a look. And then you get like, there's an alert, there's a text message, there's a pop-up, I'm like, all right, we've got like variations on a theme here. Yeah, so you can use as a product owner, use open-ended questions to stimulate the conversation. We can't afford the software. The SaaS version is $200 a year. Like the Jira one for thousands of users is like $2,000 a year. How much does one estimation session cost your team? How much does the grief you get because the dates are wrong cost you, right? You know, think about that. You can do it in a spreadsheet. It's just a bit of a pain, right? It won't scale. So the largest piece of work I've ever used this on is $120 million project. And so what we did was we worked for 8 weeks on the hardest things we could possibly do in that project. And then we used that data, that 8 weeks of work, to predict everything else in the project. And we were within, for $120 million, for the first phase of that work, we were within, I think it was like 2 weeks of our projections. And I'm like, and that was like a 40 million spend. So I'm like, yeah, it's working for me. So closing thoughts. Averages are not your friend. They hide 50% of the truth. Give your teams the gift of time. Estimation is not value, right? It's just not, it's waste. Give yourself the gift of time. I can compare, you know, how quickly would it take me to compare 2 features using this approach? There's a phrase I kind of like, which is everybody's entitled to their own opinions. You're not entitled to your own facts, right? And so that data is there. You can't lie. It's, you know, and if you work for an organization that looks at the real data and then just like, yeah, well, whatever, it's going to be the 25th of June, that might be a signal for you that that's not the right organization for you, right? Keep your eyes on anchoring bias. It affects you too, right? So there's even a cognitive bias that tells you, but by knowing there's biases, you're still affected by biases, right? Even though you think you're not, right? And then finally, forecast like a meteorologist, not a fortune teller. Right. And that's me. Thank you.
Hey, that was great, Mike. Thank you so much. We'll pause for any last minute questions. Looks like Steve has come off of mute.
Yeah, I like that too, because if they do ignore you, right, you can go back and say, look, it's some armor there too, right? I told you. And look what we got. It's what I told you.
Yep. Yeah, it's
You
the
know?
actual data, not the
Who's
fake
the
data.
problem here? Wouldn't say that, but you can think that.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, unfortunately, the space shuttle still blew up, even though the folks at Thiokol told them it would. So,
yep.
Yeah.
Well, that was the risk profile, I guess. How much risk are you prepared to take?
Well, what's interesting is it was risks that somebody else was taking. Other questions for this evening?
Things you might not have liked, things that you want me to cover again a bit more. Anything else? Any feedback for me about what I did? Is there anything I could do better?
Steve?
My glamorous assistant?
I'm just thinking about the whales, right? Because, you know, I do like that you've got a 2% chance of it taking forever, right? But have you ever experienced a whale? Like you do this stuff and then there's a whale in the data and it's like just throws everything off because it's a
Yeah,
whale and it's
that's
just
why
like you never thought of it, or
yeah. So you remember I said, if I was the Scrum Master, I'd be looking at data, or a coach, I'd be looking at data differently.
Yeah.
So, if I've got 2 seconds, haven't I, Red? I can just do this.
Yeah. We're good. We're good for time.
Okay, just give me a sec. I'll if
'Cause
I go back to,
I'm just saying you've got this statistical data, right? But they
yeah,
still could be whales. And
yeah,
the
they
whales
could.
just makes the whales make this irrelevant. Not
So
irrelevant, but you know what I'm saying, right?
yeah,
It's like,
so that's why I said I do tagging, right? Sometimes where I'm like, this one I'm just going to ignore from my data set, right? But as a product owner, as a coach, differently, I'm looking at this data a lot more, right?
Mhm.
So it's like, okay, 95% of our work gets done in 23 days. What's going on here?
Yeah.
Right? And with this tool, I can start to do the dot colors, right? And dot colors, I can do things like color by team. So I can turn on the dots, start to go, is there a specific pattern by team? Is it always one team that's bigger? Or I'm like, you know what? Maybe I'll look at the type of work, right? Defects. No, it wasn't the type of work. And the more metadata you provide for this, the better, right? If I looked at labels, right, maybe it's a specific type of work. Oh, look, it's type D seems to be the slowest pretty much all the time, or maybe not. My type C and whatever, right? I'm like, and then no value, right? So I'm like, oh, maybe there's something here I can dig into. So as a coach, I'm like, what is this? What did we do? How did we behave about it? So I use the data in this tool in a different way as a coach. The other thing I might do as a coach is I'm looking at how much work in progress the team has at any one time, right? This isn't good. We're getting more and more work in progress. The other tool I use a lot in this is the, where is it? Cumulative flow diagram. And one of the things I do with that is I put the rate lines in, which is, if I just pick this kind of time here, well, I'll just do it the big one because it looks nicer. Well, there's 2.49 coming in a day and there's 2.24 leaving in a day. All right, we seem to be fairly in balance. But I've been in teams where there's like 17 arriving a day and 4 being finished. I'm like, you are drowning, right? So this tool can be used from different perspectives, the aging work in progress. So the other one that I use as a coach a lot is the heat map, right? So it tells me where things spend time. So if I switch it from topic, from team to type, right? So if I look at this, most of our works, this is the total amount of time taken in each column, right? How long things spend of all the work. We have a problem where 767 days was spent in analysis done, but only 282 days spent in dev active. I'm like, do we have like 15 analysts and 1 dev? Right? Is there, and again here, look, this team spends most of its time waiting, right? The work doesn't take that long to do, right? So this is what I use as a coach from this tool is I start to investigate these patterns. I look instead of like, okay, so remember it said that 95% of the work got done in 23 days. I think it said at the start. If I look at flow efficiency, I can start to say, tell me where the queues are. Analysis done as a queue and dev done as a queue. So this team has a 40% efficiency. So of those 23 days, right, 8 days are actually value. The rest of it is waiting.
Wow.
Right. So for me as a coach, I'm like, how the hell do I get rid of those wait times? Right. I don't have to change the team. I don't have to tell people to go faster, work longer hours. It's like, where is the waste? So like I said, things like the tools like this with the like data, you can use it for different roles. Anyway, I've talked a lot about that. There you go. So you think about that from a different perspective.
Great stuff.
Nice.
So I hope that some of you may never do an estimate again. That's my wish.
the cool thing is that Steve is an active Scrum Master, team coach, and he has a tendency to try some of these things out on his teams. So I can hear the gears turning already.
Yeah, this looks really good. It's something we really need right now.
Well, I really enjoyed talking to everybody tonight. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mike. Getting lots of praise in the chat session. So thank you for joining us from Ottawa. That's one of the beauties, probably the only silver lining coming out of this pandemic, is that we get to hear from voices well outside of our normal service area, so to speak. So thank you so much for spending some time with us this evening. For those of you who didn't hear earlier, Mike and I met on Austin Agile. So we were attending an Agile Austin session. So that's another group, and actually it's an extremely active group. So check out Austin Agile, I think that's the name of it. It's like $30 a year for membership. And after that, you get access to all the SIGs and all the meetings, and they're all still virtual.
Actually, it's free. They
got $30 out of me somehow, jerks.
So that gives you extra stuff, right? And you get to go to the end of the year things and other stuff like that. But all of their videos are on live on YouTube. But there they have special interest groups on pretty much every subject. If you live in Texas, Agile Austin, I mean, I know it's Austin.
Yep.
Right. It's not North Dallas, clearly, right? But it's Austin. But go. It's my favorite meetup group in the whole world. And I go to meetup groups in New Zealand, I go to ones in Britain, I go to ones over in Canada. It's like, and that's the other challenge I'd give back to you is the internet has allowed you to see way more meetup groups than you'd ever possibly would if you had to walk or drive there. So use that power to give you more power in your work.
A way to sharpen the saw, get those different ideas and try the experiments, and then share them with a body, with the community, whether it's this one or a different one. Well, Mike, thanks so much. Have a great evening. With that, I'm going to go ahead and terminate the recording so I find the right thing.